All right, let's take a look at the charts for the week of January 12th. We will start with pound New Zealand dollar. We had an extremely bearish week last week. We closed 584 pips down from the open. So, as often happens with very bearish weeks on this pair, the following week is usually met with a lot of volatility or a substantial pullback. So I would like to see price come back up to this 50% fib area, or at least the 4-hour 55. We did break our triangle from last week, so we could continue down as we've only completed about probably half the range. But as you can see from the daily chart, we're in a pretty significant low area to potentially come back up. If we continue to move down, we can see a move down to our WS1 MS3 at about 90.40, which has been previous support and resistance. So our areas on the way down are going to be 90.40, 9,000, and then 88.60, I believe. Yeah, about 88.60. All right, let's move on to pound CAD. Tough one to fib here since we're in the pile of EMAs, and you can see that we've really just been in a range on this pair. Pretty wild swings. So if we take a look at the 4-hour, we could, if we break all of this stuff to the upside and 1.8, and then have a pullback and a continuation up, that might be a good long trade. Otherwise, we could just kind of hover around where we're at now and continue to move short, and we could get a good signal to short as well below the weekly pivot. So we're kind of hanging out right in the middle of where direction is going to be determined. Pound odd, we continue to move down. I'm interested in a pullback to the weekly pivot or the daily 55. Potentially, we can have a counter trade back up around WS1 and the daily 200. That's also going to be 1.83 in that area. The longer term move, the last leg up, you can see that we've pulled back into kind of the area that's going to determine whether we're going to continue that upward movement or not. We've got on the longer time frame the 50% fib, 61.8, which is right where we're at, and 78.6 down here. So as usual, the daily 200, which I've already mentioned, and the support and resistance right in that area are probably going to be pretty significant support, and we could see a large move up from there, or we can continue to see a large move down if we break those areas, as already mentioned. Pound yen, looking for a move back up to the 4-hour 55, which will probably move down to around the 50% fib. We could also see a shallow pullback to the weekly pivot and then a move down. Potentially, if we continue moving down, again, we're getting to that point where we could see a major turn back to the upside when we hit the daily 200. Pound USD, we pulled back some at the end of last week. We're currently right around the weekly pivot, which we could see a short from there. Potentially, we could see more of a pullback up to the 4-hour 55. And I would even take a pullback to the 4-hour Dynafibs, in which case we could adjust our fib to cover the last 2 weeks. So we have the major down move and the start of the pullback. So the 4-hour 55, and then the Dynafibs will be where I look for price to continue back on the short side. If we continue above the weekly pivot, we may just get a short trade from the weekly pivot. Euro New Zealand dollar, again, we had a significant move down, and I'd like to see a pullback at least to the weekly pivot, if not to the 4-hour 55. So Euro CAD, we kind of opened and closed in about the same spot. So I fibbed the daily to the downside, but we're sitting on the 4-hour 55 and around the 4-hour Dynafibs. So I would prefer to see actually a pullback up to WR1 and the daily 55 and 4-hour 200 before we made a bigger move down. Potentially we could break that area and see a move all the way back up to the daily 200. Euro AUD, we moved down quite a bit. We broke the daily 200, and I would like to see either price continue down to WS1 for a potential counter long there, or pull back to retest the daily 200 and then short from that level. Euro JPY, again, we broke the daily 200, and that's right where the weekly pivot is. So I'd like to see a pullback to that area followed by a solid short signal. If we take a look at the daily, and this is true about a lot of the yen pairs, you can see that we've kind of just nosed through our previous support area, or resistance area rather, before price broke it and really took off. So we may see a bounce up from this area, which of course could give us a potential move back above the daily 200. So just be careful with that. Make sure you have a solid rejection of that 200 before trading. All right, AUD New Zealand dollar, we had a pullback towards the end of the week. The trend's still down pretty well, and the Dynafibs, if we look back, have been doing a good job of holding price down when we do break above the 4-hour 55. And here is about 105. So you look for price to test that a little bit more, and then look for a move to the downside. Not potentially, we can see the daily 200 if we do break above that area, or even the 4-hour 200, or even the daily 55. If we take a look at the daily there, we can fib the daily, and that gives us our 50% fib around the 4-hour 200 and 61.8 around the daily 55. So those are going to be the areas that I'll look for price to move to if we do break above the 4-hour Dynafibs. On CAD, we made a very large move up, and we can look for shorts around the daily 200 and WR1. If we're going to continue to the upside, I'd like to see a pullback at least to the weekly pivot, and preferably to the daily 55. AUD JPY is a bit messy as we're still between the daily 55 and the daily 200. We have daily support. So this one I'm probably going to leave alone until we get better confirmation on direction. AUD USD, I fibbed the daily from last month's high to this month's low. And I'll look for a short around 4-hour 200 to the daily 55, anywhere in that area. New Zealand dollar CAD, we made a significant move up. You can see that the midterm fib right between the weekly pivot and MR1 is looking to be a pretty decent support and resistance area. I'll look for a pullback to there or to the 4-hour 55 to take a long. New Zealand dollar JPY, we've pulled back to the weekly pivot, and we're currently trying to move back above the bull dynafib and the 4-hour 55. Neither has been real great support and resistance, although you can see we've definitely had reactions. To that area, we've just had pretty big swings, no real trend here after this large move up like the other JPY pairs. We've kind of been hovering. New Zealand dollar USD, we made a pretty big move up and broke through a lot of our EMAs. So we'll have to see what happens if price pulls back to the daily 55. However, I'm a little leery to long this pair from that area. I'd rather actually see a move up to WR1 for a potential short from there. USD CAD, we continued an up move. We could see a shallow pullback to the weekly pivot, or again another bounce off of the 4-hour 55, or even off of the 4-hour dynafibs if we get a larger pullback. All right, USD JPY, we got below the 4-hour 200, and we've already touched it. But I don't really like the fib for last week to the short side. We could potentially move back up to the weekly pivot or 4-hour 55, which would be in our kind of zone to short, but then that would give us price having moved back above the 4-hour 200. I would rather see price move down to the daily 55 and kind of the 117 area, somewhere in there, and then give us a clear signal that we're going to move back to the upside on this pair. Euro USD, we had a little bit of a pullback at the end of last week. We could see a move back down from the weekly pivot, or potentially a pullback to the 4-hour 55 for a short.